The Global Innovation Index provides the benchmark ranking of the world's most innovative countries. Now in its 7th year, the index today shows a dramatic reshuffle among the top 10. Here to tell us why is Bruno Lanvin, the Executive Director of the INSEAD European Competitiveness Initiative and also co-author of the Global Innovation Index report. Bruno, thanks for joining us today on INSEAD Knowledge.
Yeah.
Bruno, there's been some big changes this year in the top 10. The US has leapt from 10th to 5th place, and Singapore has fallen out of the top 3, a place it has held for the last 2 years. What are the key reasons for this? Let's start with the US. Why the sudden rise?
Yes, this year, as during previous years, we've made adjustments to the methodology. And one of the results we see this year is a remarkable stability at the top. That is, the top 10, like the top 25, are the same as last year. Within those groups, however, there are significant changes, and indeed the US is one example of a country that has moved up 5 ranks. There are very clear reasons for that. The US is one of the countries which, in spite of the crisis, has maintained its level of investment in research and development in innovation-related sectors. We see, for instance, remarkable increase of expenses in computer software, which is directly applied to research and to innovation.
And Singapore fell to 8th place after 2 years at number 3. What are the key reasons for this?
For Singapore, the change is largely due to the change in methodology. That is, Singapore remains very high in terms of input and drops significantly in terms of output, which is where the methodological changes have been the strongest. For instance, we see the rank of Singapore dropping when we introduced items related to the creation of GTLDs, the generic top-level domain names on the internet, or creative industries. So these are areas in which we expect that further adjustments will be made next year. The performance of Singapore will be reflected in that, but the reality is that for this year there's indeed a significant drop attributable totally to the output side.
What changed in the methodology this year to bring about these ranking shifts?
The changes we've made this year relate largely to the output sector of the model. That is what comes out from the innovation machine, and we've put a renewed accent on the quality of innovation. This is why we use a number of indirect measures, such as creativity on the internet in particular, but also the licenses in the Madrid system, the patents, R&D trade-related items. So all these elements are part of the ecosystem of innovation and relate largely to the output side.
Another encouraging sign in the GII this year was that there were 18 emerging markets that were outperforming their peers in their respective income groups. To name a few: China, India, Jordan, and Senegal. What are these countries doing that's putting them ahead of their peers?
The reason why these countries have emerged as indeed the upcoming future champions of innovation is basically that they're focused on 3 main pillars of innovation. They have generally fostered education, they have attracted talents, they have created talents for innovation. Second, they have also nurtured the climate of investment around innovation. They have created a culture of venture and risk capital, which has helped local investors. And last but not least, they have also built strong and dynamic structures of innovation. That is the institutional part of it, which should not be neglected.
You mentioned in this year's report how innovation benefits from local specifics. What difference does local specifics make to innovation, and how can it be encouraged?
And what happens at the subnational level, typically in clusters or among regions or within a city, are at least as important as the countrywide type of data we tend to aggregate. So we've been focusing particularly in trying to identify through case studies, and the report this year includes studies from different parts of the world. We look at the Mediterranean, Arab countries, we look at Latin America, and we see a few key ingredients for success of innovation at the local level. One of them is the ability for local smaller players to connect and interact with larger global players. And typically the physical proximity of local startups around global players in a specific region helps a lot. A second identifier which we found to be common to those successful clusters or local aggregations of innovation, is the ability to combine approaches from different sectors. Typically, when you have a university, we have several universities and a business school and other types of sources of talents being present in one area, and that can be combined with the presence of enterprises in a high variety of sector. You have combinations that other clusters would have difficulties to innovate. So what we see is that the emergence of these multifaceted, multi-talented, multi-layered type of clusters is an ingredient for success.
How is innovation faring more broadly when it comes to spending and R&D budgets, especially as the rich world is now grappling with austerity?
There are two ways of looking at it. The first way is to say, indeed, because of austerity measures and rigor policies regarding public accounts, public R&D spending has diminished. And that's a fact we see on a worldwide scale. Part of that has been compensated by increased efforts in various sectors for private investment in research and development. But the second message, if we look a little bit closer at the data, is that even public spending has resisted the crisis. We described something in last year's report that we call the innovation hysteresis, which means that if you have a stop-and-go policy in terms of innovation investment, is generally detrimental to your innovation performance. It's very difficult to stop investment innovation and to resume it in a year or two after that without having to some extent duplicate expenses, reinvent the wheel. It's much more difficult to do than to maintain an equal continuous flow of investment in innovation. And some countries have continued to do that. They've continued to invest in innovation. The US is one example, which has translated into significant improvement in the rankings. And governments have been using innovation investment as a counter-cyclical policy instrument.
What would you say are the key takeaways from this year's Global Innovation Index report?
We see three key findings emerging from the report this year. The first one is stability at the top. And this is both good news and bad news. It is clearly good news for the countries at the top. So the top 10 are the same as last year. The top 25 are the same as last year, with some gain of musical chair within those groups. But the gap between these top countries and the rest seems to be increasing. And that's the second message from this year's report. There is some kind of innovation divide, which far from being reduced is actually increasing in a few aspects. A third message correlated to this one is the fact that middle-income countries, that includes the BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, and China, are indeed the ones which seem to be hitting a wall, an invisible wall, by which they progress very, very steadily and rather quickly in the innovation ranking until now, and they seem to be stuck in the middle. And that suggests that beyond the obvious ingredient for innovation, public-private investment, education, research and development, there is an ecosystem that needs to be built around factors that may be more difficult to define and measure, which have to do with the fact that innovation is not just the result of investment, it's also a mindset. And the elements that are required to develop the talents around innovation, the profiles, the degree of cooperation, still have yet to be defined and measured. So we are putting our finger on something we believe is interesting, but far from being totally explored.
Bruno, thank you very much for joining us on Inside Knowledge.
Thank you very much.